Have you ever wondered what happens when the invisible pillar holding up a rotting castle walks away? I did not cry when my family tried to erase my existence. I smiled and gave them exactly what they wished for a world without me. This is how one cruel dinner joke sparked the perfect purge. My revenge came not with screams, but with the dead silence of keystrokes. Listen closely, because the best part is always at the end. Hello. Dear listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, we want to extend a very sincere and polite greeting to all of you who spend your time with us. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, meaning we no longer have a budget to operate. If you enjoy our story today, please kindly consider supporting us with just $1 so our channel has the funds to pay our hardworking staff, allowing them to cover their living expenses and continue creating more stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the comment section of this video. My name is Kayla Ray, and this is where everything changed. The air inside the most exclusive steakhouse in Chicago was heavy with the rich scent of dry-aged beef, brown butter, and the suffocating perfume of desperate wealth. It was my parents' 30th wedding anniversary, an occasion that apparently demanded a private dining room draped in velvet curtains. Above us, a massive crystal chandelier fractured the dim light into 1,000 jagged pieces, perfectly reflecting the fragile fake reality of the high society my family so desperately clung to. Everything in that room was a calculated performance: the imported red wine, the gold-leafed dinner plates, the synchronized movements of the waitstaff. It was all a meticulously crafted stage, and I was the audience they never wanted to invite. I sat completely still at the far corner of the long mahogany table, wearing a plain, pale gray dress that made me look exactly how they treated me invisible, a dull shadow haunting their flawless family portrait. To my left sat my younger sister, Madison. She was a blinding flash of silver sequins, heavy designer makeup, and obnoxious energy, constantly adjusting her phone on a small tripod to capture her best angles for her followers. She was a social media influencer, a profession my parents treated like a royal title. Across from her was my older brother, Jackson, leaning back in a custom-tailored suit that he absolutely could not afford. He was swirling a glass of expensive scotch and loudly bragging about his latest tech startup to anyone who would listen. He called himself a visionary entrepreneur. I called him a parasite hiding behind a silk tie. For 2 agonizing hours, the dinner dragged on as a relentless, exhausting parade of empty praises. My father raised his crystal glass over and over, offering booming toasts to Madison's newest brand deals and Jackson's non-existent venture capital funding. They eagerly fed off each other's delusions, creating a toxic feedback loop of unearned arrogance. Whenever the conversation accidentally drifted toward me, it was only to serve as the punchline to a lazy, cruel joke. My job was reduced to a miserable, boring existence in a gray, air-conditioned cubicle. My mother would wave her perfectly manicured hand dismissively, sighing dramatically about how I severely lacked the creative spark and natural ambition that supposedly ran deep in the family bloodline. I did not defend myself. I just stared at the ice melting in my water glass, letting their insults wash over me, feeling like a hardened stone at the bottom of a polluted river. Then came the dessert. The waiters brought out delicate truffle mushroom tarts, an absurdly expensive delicacy meant to be the glorious crown jewel of the evening. My mother took a long, greedy sip of her dark red wine. Her cheeks were deeply flushed, her eyes glazed over with the intoxicating mix of expensive alcohol and pure, unchecked vanity. She set the wine glass down on the table, looked straight across the white linen directly into my eyes, and let her civilized mask slip completely. "Sometimes I wish you were never born," she slurred, her voice cutting sharply through the soft jazz playing in the background. "Our family's life would be so perfect." For a fraction of a second, the lavish dining room held its breath. A normal family would have gasped in horror. A normal father would have immediately reprimanded his wife. A normal sibling would have fiercely defended their sister. But my family was not normal. They laughed. It started with a cruel snort from Jackson, followed by a high-pitched, mocking giggle from Madison, and finally, my father's deep, booming chuckle. It was a horrific chorus of cruelty, a savage, unified roar of agreement that bounced off the mahogany walls and pierced straight through the very last remaining layer of tolerance I possessed in my soul. They were laughing at my non-existence. They were celebrating the idea of my erasure. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not flip the heavy table or demand a tearful apology. Instead, I experienced a moment of absolute crystalline clarity. I gently placed my heavy silver dessert fork down on the pristine tablecloth. My erratic heartbeat suddenly slowed to a steady, rhythmic calm. A profound, deadly silence descended over my entire mind, suffocating the burning pain and replacing it with pure, unbreakable ice. In that singular, defining moment, I truly understood my place. I was not a beloved daughter, and I was not a cherished sister. I was merely a sacrificial lamb, bleeding out quietly so they could paint their extravagant walls with my blood. I slowly pushed my heavy wooden chair back and stood up straight. The pale gray fabric of my dress settled softly around my legs. I looked down at the three people who were still wiping tears of vicious laughter from their eyes, and I smiled at them. It was not a sad smile. It was a smile as cold and sharp as a fresh razor blade. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the table, and delivered a single sentence. My voice was perfectly level and completely devoid of any human emotion, effortlessly killing their laughter in an instant. Then you are all going to love what I do next. Without waiting for a single response, I turned my back on the lavish table, the sparkling crystal chandelier, and the people who shared my last name. I walked out the heavy oak doors, stepping out into the cool, dark Chicago night, leaving behind the invisible ghost I used to be, and fully embracing the ruthless monster they had just created. As the freezing wind swept across the pavement, the pathetic irony of my family's ignorance almost made me laugh out loud in the empty street. They honestly believed my life consisted of pushing paper in a drab cubicle, pitying my rigid, unimaginative existence. What they did not know, and what I had painstakingly hidden behind nondescript sweaters for 5 grueling years, was my actual profession. I was a senior threat intelligence analyst at Vanguard Nexus Solutions. It was a top-tier private cybersecurity firm handling global corporate defense, and my annual compensation was well into the mid-six figures. I did not wear designer brands because I did not need armor to feel powerful. I controlled the digital architecture that wealthy executives paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to protect. My analytical rigidity, the exact trait they mocked relentlessly, was the only barrier keeping my entire family from rotting in a federal penitentiary or sleeping in a homeless shelter. Take my glamorous sister, Madison. She flaunted her influencer lifestyle as if she had built a digital empire through sheer charm and authentic beauty. The naked truth was that Madison was a colossal, desperate fraud. 80% of her devoted followers were ghosts in the machine. When she started losing major brand deals 2 years ago because her engagement metrics catastrophically tanked, she panicked. I stepped in. I engineered a highly sophisticated phantom bot network that flawlessly simulated human interaction. My system generated thousands of fake likes, organic-looking comments, and shares across multiple time zones. I was the invisible puppeteer keeping her lucrative advertising contracts alive. Without my ghost code operating 24 hours a day, Madison was just a talentless girl screaming into a digital void, practically invisible to the algorithms. Then there was Jackson, the self-proclaimed visionary of the family. His tech startups were nothing more than a fragile, hollow cover for a crippling sports gambling addiction. 3 years ago, he found himself owing hundreds of thousands of dollars to brutal bookies and underground loan sharks who did not care about his tailored silk ties or his prestigious last name. He came to my apartment sobbing, begging on his knees for salvation. I did not just lend him the money. I engineered a complex algorithm that systematically laundered his massive gambling debts through secure offshore servers. I scrubbed his digital footprint so thoroughly that neither the Internal Revenue Service nor the violent underworld creditors could trace the missing funds. He played the role of a brilliant investor during dinner, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire financial reality was a fragile digital mirage I maintained on a daily basis. And my parents, the undisputed royalty of the evening, were the biggest parasites of them all. Their sprawling suburban estate, their imported luxury cars, their endless exclusive country club memberships, it was all built on a terrifying, unstable mountain of debt. Years ago, their reckless spending finally caught up with their mediocre income. To save them from absolute public ruin and bankruptcy, I quietly structured a labyrinth of shell companies. I used my own immaculate credit score as the hidden collateral to secure the massive loans that kept their glamorous facades standing tall. They were sleeping deeply in a mansion technically financed and legally anchored by the daughter they openly wished had never been born. Why did I do it? Why did I willingly become the architect of their lies? It was a pathetic, deeply ingrained childhood hunger for validation. Deep down, the little girl inside me foolishly believed that if I just made myself useful enough, if I solved all their catastrophic problems from the shadows, they would eventually see my worth. I thought my silent, monumental sacrifices would earn me a permanent seat at their table of affection, but the savage, unified laughter echoing in that private dining room shattered that delusion permanently. I had given them my blood, my unmatched skills, and my pristine financial identity, and they looked at my sacrifice as if it were worthless garbage. They did not love the savior they could not see. But as I hailed a cab in the dark, I realized I was not crying. My chest did not ache with the familiar sting of rejection. Instead, an electrifying, pure sense of absolute liberation surged through my veins. For the first time in my entire 30 years of life, I felt completely free from the suffocating chains of familial duty. The burning anger inside my chest crystallized into a flawless, beautifully cold equation. They wanted a world without my presence. They firmly believed they had built their perfect, shiny lives entirely on their own merit. I was simply going to grant them their exact wish. I was going to quietly pull the plug on the artificial life support system I had provided for years. I would return them to the exact, pathetic reality they had actually created. I gave the driver the address to my secure apartment building and prepared to open Pandora's box. I bypassed the heavy steel doors of my fortress-like apartment building, nodding silently to the night security guard. My sanctuary was on the 32nd floor, a space completely disconnected from the velvet and chandeliers of my past. I walked into the dark, silent living room. I did not bother turning on the main overhead lights. Instead, I headed straight to the kitchen, grinding fresh dark roast beans and brewing a steaming mug of black coffee. The bitter, scalding liquid grounded me. I carried the mug into my home office, the true nerve center of my existence. I powered up my custom-built personal server rack. Instantly, the low, steady hum of cooling fans filled the room, and 4 massive, curved monitors flared to life, casting a harsh, pale blue glow across my face. It was time to operate. No anesthesia, no hesitation. I started with the easiest target. I opened the encrypted command terminal that housed Madison's digital soul. Her entire influencer empire was neatly contained within a few thousand lines of automated scripts I had written on a boring Sunday 2 years ago. I watched the live feed of her notifications, fake likes, artificial comments, and automated shares ticking upward every single second. It was a masterpiece of digital deception. With a few rapid keystrokes, I bypassed the administrative locks. I did not just pause the bot network. I highlighted the root directory and initiated a permanent wipe protocol. I watched the progress bar race across the screen as the source code was systematically shredded into unrecoverable data fragments. The phantom followers vanished into thin air. Without my artificial life support, the algorithm would immediately detect the sudden void and shadow ban her account. I imagined her waking up to a dead phone, her engagement metrics plunging into a terrifying freefall down to the pathetic, single-digit reality of her actual influence. I pressed the enter key one last time, sealing her digital tomb. Next was Jackson. His situation required surgical precision. I accessed the secure offshore proxy servers where I had meticulously hidden his crippling financial reality. For years, I had maintained an impenetrable cryptographic firewall around his gambling ledgers and massive debts, presenting a sanitized, fake portfolio to his investors. I systematically dismantled those security protocols, stripping away every layer of encryption until his naked, disastrous financial history was exposed. I compiled a comprehensive dossier containing every single wire transfer, every illegal sports bet, and every unpaid loan. I drafted a simple, anonymous email. There was no threat, no dramatic message, just the cold, hard data attached as a compressed file. I populated the recipient list with the private email addresses of his aggressive underground creditors, the Internal Revenue Service tip line, and the wealthy venture capitalists he had been swindling. My finger hovered over the mouse for a fraction of a second before I clicked send. The data packets flew out into the night. His illusion of being a wealthy startup founder was officially dead. Finally, I turned my attention to the grand finale. I opened the secure portal for the elite wealth management bank that handled my parents' sprawling estate. I navigated through the labyrinth of shell corporations until I reached the Master Family Trust. My name sat quietly at the bottom of the foundational documents, listed as the sole financial guarantor. It was my immaculate credit and hidden collateral that kept the bank from foreclosing on their massive mansion and canceling their unlimited black credit cards. I located the emergency divestment clause I had secretly embedded in the original contract. It was a fail-safe mechanism I hoped I would never have to use. Tonight, it was my weapon. I initiated the withdrawal sequence. The screen prompted me for 3 separate biometric verifications and a master password. I provided them all flawlessly. A legal notification was immediately generated, formally severing my assets from their liabilities. The bank's automated risk assessment system would process the change by morning. Without my financial backing, their debt-to-income ratio would trigger immediate, catastrophic defaults across all their luxury accounts. The phantom foundation of their aristocratic lifestyle simply evaporated into the digital ether. With the empire dismantled, I needed to ensure I could never be dragged back into the rubble. I accessed the National Healthcare and Emergency Registries, permanently deleting my name and contact information from every single file connecting me to them. I wiped my primary email address, the one they used to send their demanding requests, and scheduled the account for immediate deletion. I picked up my personal smartphone, removed the physical SIM card, and snapped it cleanly in half, tossing the tiny plastic pieces into the trash can. I had already secured a new, unlisted number registered under a corporate proxy. As a final measure, I purged all global positioning system tracking permissions tied to their devices, making me a literal ghost in their world. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and glanced at the digital clock glowing on the wall. It had taken exactly 45 minutes. 45 minutes to completely obliterate an empire of arrogant lies that took 10 agonizing years to build. I closed the master terminal, plunging the room back into a peaceful, quiet darkness. I picked up my empty coffee mug, walked to the bedroom, and slipped under the heavy duvet. As I closed my eyes, a profound wave of relief washed over my entire body. For the first time in my existence, I was truly unburdened. I drifted off to sleep, descending into the deepest, most peaceful rest of my entire life. For the first 72 hours, the universe gifted me something I had never truly experienced before: absolute, flawless silence. I woke up each morning in my secure apartment, went down to the Vanguard Nexus corporate offices, and performed my highly complex job without the constant, buzzing anxiety of someone else's manufactured emergency hanging over my head. I walked through the busy city streets during my lunch breaks, breathing in the crisp air of genuine freedom. There were no frantic text messages demanding emergency fund transfers. There were no arrogant, entitled requests to secretly fix a broken server or legally cover up a bounced check. The air around me felt incredibly light, completely unburdened by the toxic, heavy gravity of my relatives. But while I was peacefully sipping green tea in the corporate break room, a massive, invisible digital time bomb was aggressively counting down at my parents' sprawling estate. I knew exactly how the global financial and digital ecosystems worked. It always took a few days for the algorithms to catch up, for the automated banking systems to flag the massive discrepancies, and for the ruthless legal machinery to grind into motion. The 3 days of silence was not a permanent reprieve for them. It was merely the ocean water pulling far back from the shore before the devastating tsunami hit the beach. The very first domino to fall was Madison. By the late afternoon of the fourth day, her carefully curated digital empire completely and spectacularly imploded. The platform algorithm, no longer force-fed by my sophisticated, round-the-clock bot network, recognized the massive, instantaneous drop in engagement and immediately flagged her account for severe fraudulent activity. Her major sponsors, massive global cosmetic and luxury fashion brands with zero tolerance for fake marketing metrics, did not just drop her from their campaigns, they unleashed their vicious corporate legal teams. I watched her live broadcast from a secure, anonymous burner account. It was a complete disaster. Madison was sitting on the floor of her expansive walk-in closet. Her expensive designer makeup smeared down her face in ugly dark streaks as she sobbed hysterically into the camera lens. She was wildly waving heavy legal cease and desist letters, screaming to her few remaining actual followers that she was being unfairly targeted and sued for hundreds of thousands of dollars in breach of contract damages. Behind the scenes, I knew exactly how much she was panicking. My hidden monitoring software showed she had attempted to call my old phone number 47 times in a single hour. Every single desperate call was met with the cold, automated tone of a permanently disconnected line. She was drowning in the shallow puddle she always thought was an ocean, desperately grasping for the invisible hand that had kept her afloat for years. While Madison was having a highly public digital meltdown, Jackson was facing a much darker physical reality. The anonymous data packets I had sent out had hit their targets with devastating surgical precision. On the morning of the fifth day, Jackson swaggered down the marble steps of his luxury high-rise apartment building, likely heading to another fake venture capital meeting. Instead, he was abruptly intercepted by three massive, stone-faced men wearing cheap suits and carrying the heavy, terrifying aura of underground debt collectors. They physically backed him against the cold brick wall of the side alleyway, violently demanding immediate repayment of the massive sports gambling debts he had foolishly accrued. The wealthy venture capitalists he had been smoothly swindling had already pulled their funding overnight after receiving the unredacted, deeply incriminating financial dossiers I provided. Panicking and fearing for his physical safety, Jackson managed to slip away and sprinted to the nearest branch of his elite wealth management bank, fully intending to withdraw whatever cash he had left to buy himself some time to escape. He stood at the polished mahogany counter, sweating profusely, only to have the bank manager loudly inform him that every single one of his accounts was completely frozen solid. Federal tax authorities had flagged his entire portfolio for suspected wire fraud and massive financial discrepancies. In the span of a few hours, he was instantly reduced from a wealthy, arrogant tech visionary to a terrified, penniless criminal suspect, completely locked out of the financial system while violent predators actively hunted him down the street. But the most poetic, satisfying justice was reserved for the undisputed architects of my misery, my parents. Their inevitable downfall was incredibly public, absolutely brutal, and entirely legal. It happened on a sunny Friday afternoon at the most exclusive country club in the state. My mother had just confidently ordered a round of vintage imported champagne for her table of wealthy socialite friends, casually handing over her heavy black titanium credit card. The senior waiter returned a few tense minutes later, holding the card by the very edge, and politely but firmly informed her that the transaction was declined. Not just declined, but permanently flagged for immediate confiscation by the issuing bank. The horrific, burning embarrassment of that moment, surrounded by the whispers of her judgmental peers, was only the appetizer. When my parents rushed back in a panic to their sprawling suburban mansion to figure out the supposed banking error, they found a grim, unsmiling legal process server waiting for them at the massive wrought iron front gates. He handed my furious father a thick stack of heavy legal documents. It was a formal court subpoena and an official notice of extreme foreclosure from the Primary Wealth Management Bank. Without my immaculate financial backing and the massive hidden collateral I had quietly withdrawn earlier that week, their debt-to-income ratio had triggered an automatic, catastrophic default across all their accounts. The bank was legally seizing the property, giving them exactly 30 days to pack up and vacate the premises. The luxurious, untouchable bubble they had ruthlessly protected and paraded around was suddenly popped, leaving them standing on the perfectly manicured lawn as nothing more than broke, over-leveraged frauds. As the weekend arrived, their sheer, unadulterated panic rapidly morphed into venomous, desperate hatred. Since my personal phone and private email were entirely dead to them, they managed to track down my secure corporate email address at Vanguard Nexus Solutions. Over the span of 48 hours, they flooded my administrative inbox with dozens of frantic audio messages and furious texts. The elegant mask of aristocratic civility was completely gone, replaced by raw, ugly desperation. "You selfish, ungrateful little traitor!" My father's voice roared through the digital audio file, his words shaking with rage. "You are maliciously destroying the family name. Fix this bank issue right now." Madison's voice followed, sounding like a shrill shriek of pure panic. "You are doing this because you are completely jealous of my beauty and my success. Turn the system back on before I am ruined." Jackson left a chilling, breathless voicemail, openly threatening to show up at my office building and completely destroy my professional career if I did not unfreeze his banking situation immediately. They fiercely blamed me for the collapsing walls around them, completely ignoring the fundamental fact that they were the exact ones who chose to build their massive house on shifting sand. I did not reply to a single message. On a bright, peaceful Sunday morning, I sat comfortably at a quiet, sunlit table in a small artisan cafe across town. I ordered a hot oat milk latte and a warm, fresh pastry. I opened my secure tablet and used a specialized anonymous software routing tool to safely listen to their voicemails and read their unhinged threats without ever triggering a read receipt. The audio files played softly through my wireless earbuds, their familiar voices echoing with pure, unfiltered terror and rage. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my warm coffee, feeling the morning sun on my face. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no lingering obligation or sudden urge to rush in and save them from the fire they started. The only emotion that briefly flickered through my chest was a distant, incredibly cold pity. I pitied these weak, parasitic creatures who had spent their entire adult lives feeding off my energy, my intellect, and my hard-earned resources, only to suddenly discover that without their invisible host, they absolutely did not know how to stand on their own 2 feet. Exactly 2 weeks passed since the fateful dinner. My secure sanctuary was finally breached, with their unlimited credit lines completely frozen and their liquid assets legally seized. They must have scraped together whatever loose physical cash they had left from pawning luxury watches to hire a desperate private investigator. They somehow managed to track down the highly classified, unlisted address of my fortress-like luxury apartment complex. The call came from the chief concierge early on a gloomy Tuesday evening. His voice was tense and deeply apologetic. He informed me that 4 extremely agitated, highly aggressive individuals were currently causing a massive public disturbance at the front desk. They were screaming at the lobby staff and aggressively demanding that I come down immediately, threatening to call the city police if I refused. I calmly instructed the concierge to hold them exactly where they were. I took my time. There was absolutely no rush. I walked into my expansive, perfectly organized closet and selected a sharply tailored, dark charcoal business suit, pairing it with a crisp, stark white silk blouse and polished black leather heels. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, an untouchable, high-ranking corporate executive who held absolute power. I stepped into the private glass elevator and watched the vibrant city skyline blur past as I descended 32 floors to the ground level. When the heavy polished metal doors slid silently open, I stepped out into the massive, echoing marble lobby. I was immediately flanked by two towering, broad-shouldered building security guards dressed in tactical black uniforms. They had been fully briefed on the hostile situation and matched my slow, deliberate pace. The visual contrast between us was incredibly jarring. The undisputed royalty of Chicago high society looked completely ravaged. My mother's previously flawless, heavily highlighted blonde hair was now a tangled, unkempt mess. Her expensive designer trench coat was deeply wrinkled, and the thick layer of expensive foundation on her face could not hide the dark, exhausted, hollow bags forming under her eyes, the very moment she spotted me walking across the polished stone floor. She immediately lunged forward, though the security guards smoothly and firmly blocked her physical path. Finding herself physically contained, she instantly deployed her favorite, most historically effective weapon in tense emotional manipulation. She forced a series of loud, theatrical sobs, aggressively clutching her chest as if she were experiencing severe physical agony. "You have had your little joke, Kayla," she wailed, her shrill voice echoing terribly off the high, vaulted glass ceiling for everyone in the building to hear. "This is enough. You need to fix everything right now. Stop this madness. We are a family, and you are destroying us." Jackson and Madison immediately jumped in, completely abandoning any fake pretense of familial love or basic decency. Jackson was violently trembling, his face a terrifying shade of pale red. He was heavily sweating through a cheap cotton dress shirt, looking like a cornered animal. "I am taking you straight to federal court," he roared, aggressively pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "I am going to sue you for massive property damage and unauthorized digital interference. You hacked my secure private networks. You ruined my life. You are going to spend decades in a concrete cell." Madison was literally jumping up and down in pure, unadulterated panic, her voice violently cracking into a deafening, hysterical screech. "My entertainment lawyers are drafting the prosecution papers right now. You intentionally destroyed my global brand. You are going to pay for every single dollar I lost. You owe me my career." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice in defense, and I certainly did not engage in a pathetic shouting match. I stood perfectly still, my posture impeccably straight, my hands resting calmly and casually in my suit pockets. I looked at the four of them, not as family members, not as human beings who shared my genetics, but exactly the way a cold clinical research scientist observes a cage of desperate, thrashing test subjects reacting to an unpredictable electric shock. Their chaotic screams washed over me. Completely meaningless and utterly devoid of any real power, the heavy psychological dynamic had completely inverted. They were the beggars, and I was the locked vault. When they finally paused for a fraction of a second to catch their ragged breath, I spoke. My voice was deep, incredibly steady, and carried a resonant, heavy authority that effortlessly commanded absolute silence in the cavernous room. "I did not destroy anything," I stated, making slow, deliberate, piercing eye contact with each and every one of them. "I simply stopped paying for your delusional existence." That single, terrifyingly calm sentence was like throwing a barrel of raw gasoline directly onto a raging bonfire. Their temporary silence completely shattered. My father, who had been aggressively glaring at the terrified concierge up until now, finally turned his immense wrath toward me, joining the chaotic, deafening chorus. They all began screaming at exactly the same time, wildly demanding their fundamental rights, loudly and aggressively listing all the luxurious things they firmly believed I inherently owed them by blood. They demanded the suburban house back. They demanded the elite bank accounts completely unfrozen. They demanded the digital algorithms fully restored. They desperately demanded their fake, comfortable lives back. I simply let them exhaust their lungs. I let them showcase their pathetic reality to the entire lobby. While they continued to scream and wildly flail their arms in the center of the pristine, brightly lit room, I slowly and methodically reached into the sleek black leather briefcase I had brought down with me. I completely bypassed the secure company tablets and the heavily encrypted hard drives. Wrapping my fingers around a single, very thin manila folder, I smoothly pulled it out, holding it casually in my right hand, feeling the crisp edge of the paper against my skin. The trap was perfectly set, and I was finally prepared to deliver the absolute final blow. I held out the thin manila folder, extending it just enough to bait the trap. Jackson, completely blinded by his own frantic entitlement and assuming I had finally broken under their collective public pressure, aggressively snatched the document right out of my hand. He let out a breathless, arrogant scoff, visibly relaxing his tense shoulders. He clearly expected to find the necessary legal passwords, the release authorization forms, or the banking override codes required to instantly restore his frozen accounts and reinstate their glamorous, untouchable status. He violently flipped the cardboard cover open. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting easily at my sides, and watched his face. It took exactly 10 agonizing seconds for the absolute reality of his situation to register. The aggressive, entitled sneer that he had worn like a crown for his entire life completely vanished. It was instantly replaced by a horrifying, absolute pallor. Every single drop of warm blood rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified, freshly exhumed corpse. His hands began to shake so violently that the heavy legal papers loudly rattled in the quiet, echoing lobby. His eyes darted frantically back and forth across the crisp, black text, desperately searching for a loophole that simply did not exist. "What is it?" my mother demanded, her shrill voice slicing through the heavy tension. "Jackson, tell her to sign the release. Read it." Jackson could not speak. His throat bobbed uselessly, his jaw hanging completely slack. Since he was entirely paralyzed by shock, I decided to graciously explain it to them. My voice was perfectly modulated, projecting clearly across the polished marble room. 5 years ago, when you were all drowning in a spectacular ocean of toxic debt and begging me for a miraculous financial bailout, I placed a massive stack of highly complex legal documents in front of you. You were so incredibly eager to get your hands on my pristine credit and my hidden corporate capital that you did not bother to read a single paragraph. You just blindly signed exactly where I told you to sign. Madison stopped her hysterical crying, slowly lowering her hands from her face as a new, profound sense of dread washed over her. "That document," I continued, gesturing smoothly toward the shaking papers in Jackson's hands, "was an irrevocable master proxy and asset transfer agreement. It explicitly legally placed the deed to the sprawling suburban mansion, the official titles to the imported luxury vehicles, and the complete, global intellectual property rights to Madison's digital brand under the absolute ownership of a private, offshore investment fund, a specialized fund where I, and I alone, sit as the sole operating chairman and ultimate beneficiary." My father took a stumbling step backward, his face turning an ugly shade of purple as the sheer magnitude of his catastrophic mistake crashed down upon him. "And if you look very closely at page 42, I said, my tone turning dangerously soft, "you will find a very specific, heavily fortified morality clause. It clearly states that any severe emotional abuse, public humiliation, or verbal assault directed at the legal representative of the fund constitutes an immediate, unredeemable breach of contract. That incredibly cruel, unified joke you all shared at the steakhouse dinner was not just an insult. It was a legally binding trigger mechanism." I let the weight of my words settle over them like a thick, suffocating wool blanket. "I have already fully exercised my legal right to permanently liquidate every single physical and digital asset you mistakenly thought you owned. The massive financial proceeds have already been securely and permanently transferred to a global charitable organization. You have absolutely zero legal ground to sue me. No lawyer will take your case because you voluntarily signed your entire lives away. You own absolutely nothing. You are absolutely nothing." The monumental, crushing weight of that terrifying reality hit them like a runaway freight train. My mother let out a strangled, pathetic gasp that sounded like a dying animal. Her knees buckled completely underneath her, and she collapsed heavily onto the cold, polished marble floor of the apartment lobby. Her expensive designer trench coat spreading out around her like a broken, useless parachute. Jackson dropped the folder. The papers scattered across the floor, but he made no move to pick them up. He just stared at his empty hands, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single coherent sound. Madison stood entirely frozen like a delicate glass statue, her eyes wide with unadulterated, mind-numbing horror as she finally realized her entire digital and physical existence had just been legally erased from the planet. The massive, cavernous lobby was completely consumed by a suffocating, dead silence. The security guards behind me did not even blink. This time, there was no savage, unified roar of agreement. There was absolutely no laughter. I took one slow, deliberate step forward and gracefully crouched down until I was exactly at eye level with my violently trembling mother on the floor. I looked directly into her terrified, hollow, tear-filled eyes. I gave her a smile that was incredibly gentle, yet colder than the darkest winter night. "You wished I was never born," I whispered, my voice echoing clearly in the perfectly silent room. "I have officially made that a reality. From this exact moment on, I do not exist in your world. Good luck with the real life." I stood back up, elegantly smoothing the crisp, unwrinkled fabric of my charcoal suit. I turned my back on the pathetic, broken remnants of a highly toxic family and walked calmly, purposefully toward the waiting private glass elevator. The heavy metal doors slid shut with a satisfying final click, instantly and permanently, cutting off the pathetic sounds of their complete, irreversible collapse. I had already finished packing my apartment. My formal resignation from the Chicago corporate office was finalized, and my immediate transfer to a highly classified, top-secret Vanguard Nexus branch in Austin, Texas, was officially complete. Exactly 6 months later, the freezing winds and the suffocating memories of Chicago were a distant, entirely irrelevant ghost story. I sat comfortably on the expansive, sun-drenched wooden porch of my beautiful, custom-built private villa nestled deep in the rolling Texas hills. The late afternoon sky was a brilliant, endless, breathtaking canvas of vibrant blue and spun gold. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of a perfectly aged, incredibly expensive red wine, letting the rich, complex flavors ground me entirely in the beautiful present moment. I breathed in the warm, fragrant southern air. A completely new, vibrant life belonged entirely to me. It was a life defined by absolute freedom, unyielding personal pride, and brilliant, untouchable peace. I had finally learned the absolute most crucial lesson of human existence: respect must always, without fail, precede duty. My permanent, silent absence was undoubtedly the most ruthless, devastating revenge I could have ever inflicted upon them, but infinitely more importantly, it was the absolute greatest, most beautiful gift I could have ever given to myself. Thank you so very much. Dear listeners, for spending your valuable time deeply engaging with my story today. I would absolutely love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please kindly leave a comment and let me know. If you found today's story entertaining and satisfying, please warmly consider helping us out with a donation of just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by using the convenient PayPal link provided in the description and the pinned comment below this video. Your generous, kind support provides the crucial funds necessary to pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families and allowing us to continue actively creating better, more exciting stories to serve you. Thank you again, and please take wonderful care of yourselves.